His plane was torn apart. Hydraulic fluid blinded him. Fire erupted in the cockpit, and a German ace was right behind him, pumping round after round into his defenseless aircraft. Robert S. Johnson should have died that day over France, but he didn't. This is the story of the most miraculous survival flight in World War II, and the pilot who refused to let death win. June 26, 1943. The skies over northern France. Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson was 23 years old, flying his P-47 Thunderbolt with the legendary 56th Fighter Group, known as Zemp's Wolfpack. Johnson was from Lawton, Oklahoma, a small-town kid who fell in love with flying at age 8 when he watched an air show with his father. He joined the Army Air Forces just months before Pearl Harbor, driven by one simple dream: to fly. By June of 1943, he'd only been in combat for 2 months. He was still learning, still proving himself. His commanders thought he was too aggressive, too reckless. They had no idea what he was capable of. That afternoon, 48 P-47 Thunderbolts took off from RAF Manston. Their mission was simple: escort B-17 bombers returning from a raid on Villacoublay airfield near Paris. Johnson was flying in the rear of the 61st Squadron's formation. The worst position to be in. He didn't know it yet, but 16 German Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighters were diving out of the sun, straight at them. The Germans hit them from above and behind. No warning, no time to react. The formation scattered instantly. Thunderbolts broke in every direction, desperately trying to shake the enemy fighters clawing at their tails. Johnson's plane was one of the first to get hit. A FW-190 locked onto him and opened fire. 20mm cannon shells tore into his fuselage, one after another. Boom, boom, boom. 21 cannon shells ripped through Johnson's P-47 in seconds. The hydraulic system exploded. Fluid sprayed everywhere, flooding the cockpit, soaking Johnson's face. His eyes immediately began to burn. Within moments, they swelled shut. He could barely see. A machine gun bullet grazed the tip of his nose. Shrapnel tore into his right leg. The cockpit erupted in flames. Johnson's plane went into a violent spin, plummeting toward the French countryside. He was trapped in a burning, spiraling coffin at 28,000 feet. Through the searing pain and blinding hydraulic fluid, Johnson fought the controls. His training kicked in. Muscle memory took over. He had to get out. He reached for the canopy release, pulled it. Nothing happened. The canopy was jammed. The damage from the cannon fire had warped the metal frame. He was locked inside. Panic set in. If he couldn't bail out, he was going down with the plane. But then, a miracle. The fire suddenly went out. Starved of oxygen, it flamed out on its own. Johnson stopped pulling at the canopy. If he couldn't jump, he'd have to fly this wreck home. With enormous effort, he leveled the spinning aircraft. The P-47 stabilized, barely. The hydraulic system was destroyed. His controls were sluggish, unresponsive. Engine oil had sprayed across the windscreen, leaving him nearly blind. He stuck his head through the shattered canopy to see where he was going. The icy wind at high altitude ripped across his swollen eyes. It felt like knives stabbing into his skull. But Johnson could see the English Channel in the distance. If he could just make it there, he'd have a chance. Then Johnson saw something behind him. A lone aircraft, closing fast. For a split second, he thought it might be one of his squadron mates. Maybe someone coming to escort him home. But as the plane got closer, Johnson's heart sank. It was a Focke-Wulf FW-190. And it wasn't just any German pilot. Years later, historians would determine that the pilot was likely Egon Meyer, one of the Luftwaffe's deadliest aces. By the end of the war, Meyer would have 102 confirmed kills. Johnson was entirely at his mercy. The German pilot lined up behind the crippled Thunderbolt and opened fire. Cannon shells hammered into Johnson's plane. The tail was shredded. Pieces of metal tore away and tumbled through the sky. Johnson tried to maneuver, but his controls were barely responding. He couldn't fight back. His guns were jammed. He couldn't run. His engine was damaged. All he could do was huddle behind the inch-thick armor plate behind his seat and pray. The German fired again. More rounds tore into the fuselage. Johnson felt the impacts like hammer blows against the airframe. And then the firing stopped. Johnson looked out through the broken canopy. The FW-190 had pulled up alongside him, close enough that Johnson could see the German pilot's face through the cockpit glass. The German pilot looked at him, and then he saluted. Johnson was stunned. Was the German sparing him? Was this some kind of mercy? No. The FW-190 dropped back, lined up behind Johnson's tail again, and resumed firing. The German wasn't showing mercy. He was toying with him. More shells ripped into the P-47. Johnson's plane shuddered with each hit. He couldn't believe it was still flying. The Thunderbolt was a tank in the sky. But this was beyond anything it was designed to survive. Once again, the German pilot pulled alongside. Once again, he saluted. Then he dropped back and fired again. This time, Johnson realized what was happening. The German had run out of 20mm cannon ammunition. Now he was using his 7.92mm machine guns. Lighter rounds, less destructive, but still deadly. The machine gun fire rattled across Johnson's plane like hail on a tin roof. Over 200 rounds had now hit his aircraft. The P-47 Thunderbolt was living up to its nickname, the Jug. It could take a beating like no other fighter in the war. But even the Jug had limits. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the German pilot pulled away. He'd run out of ammunition. The FW-190 banked hard, waggled its wings one last time, and disappeared back toward France. Johnson was alone in the sky. Barely conscious, half blind, flying a plane that was more holes than metal. But he was alive. The English Channel stretched out below him. Gray water, cold, unforgiving. If Johnson went down now, he'd never be found. He kept the nose pointed toward England. His vision was almost gone. He had to stick his head out of the cockpit every few seconds, just to see where he was going. The wind tore at his face, but he didn't care. Home was just ahead. Minutes felt like hours. The battered P-47 groaned and shook, threatening to come apart at any moment. But it held together. Johnson crossed the coastline. He was over England. But he wasn't safe yet. Without hydraulics, he had no landing gear, no flaps. His controls were barely functional. Landing this plane would be a miracle in itself. Johnson radioed ahead to RAF Manston. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. He told them that he was coming in hot, and he was coming in hard. He lined up with the runway. His hands were shaking, his vision was blurred. He could barely feel his right leg from the shrapnel wound. He pulled back on the stick. The nose came up. The P-47 dropped toward the runway. Johnson held his breath. The plane hit the ground hard. It skipped once, twice. Then the belly scraped against the concrete with a deafening screech. Sparks flew in every direction. The Thunderbolt slid down the runway like a wounded animal. And then it stopped. Silence. Johnson sat there for a moment, unable to move. He couldn't believe he was alive. Ground crews rushed to the plane. They yanked open the jammed canopy and pulled Johnson out. He collapsed into their arms. When they looked at the plane, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Over 200 bullet and cannon holes. The tail nearly shot off. The hydraulic system destroyed. The cockpit shredded, engine oil everywhere. One mechanic looked at the wreckage and shook his head. This plane should not have made it back. But it did. Robert S. Johnson spent a few days recovering from his wounds. Shrapnel was pulled from his leg, his eyes healed, his nose stopped bleeding. 5 days later, he was back in the cockpit. Johnson didn't just survive that day over France. He became one of the deadliest fighter pilots in the European theater. By the time he completed his combat tour in May 1944, he had flown 91 missions and scored 27 confirmed kills. He was the first American pilot in Europe to break Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record of 26 victories. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and multiple Distinguished Flying Crosses. But Johnson never forgot that day over France. The day he should have died. The day a German ace saluted him twice before trying to finish him off. The day his P-47 Thunderbolt refused to quit. Johnson would later say, "I owe my life to two things: the toughness of the P-47 Thunderbolt and the grace of God. That plane saved me more times than I can count." After the war, Johnson became a test pilot for Republic Aviation, the company that built the Thunderbolt. He spent 18 years redesigning the cockpit, making it more user-friendly for the next generation of pilots. He wrote a book about his experiences called Thunderbolt. It became a bestseller and is still considered one of the greatest pilot memoirs ever written. Robert S. Johnson passed away on December 27, 1998, at the age of 78. To this day, no one knows for certain who the German pilot was that day. Some historians believe it was Egon Meyer, the ace who would go on to shoot down 102 Allied aircraft before being killed in action in March 1944. If it was Meyer, he chose the wrong pilot to toy with. Because Robert S. Johnson didn't just survive, he thrived. And he never stopped flying. This is what courage looks like. Not just fighting when you have the advantage, but refusing to quit when everything says you should. Robert S. Johnson's story reminds us that sometimes survival isn't about firepower or tactics. It's about sheer willpower. The refusal to give up. The determination to make it home no matter what. 200 bullets couldn't kill him, because he simply wouldn't let them. If you want to hear more untold stories like this, hit subscribe. These heroes deserve to be remembered.